This conversation is brought to you ad-free thanks to the generous support of the Howl in the Wilderness Patreon community. To gain access to early release of all episodes, the full podcast archives, and other extras, visit patreon.com/Howl in the Wilderness. Douglas Thomas, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, thanks for joining me. We're here to speak about this recent movie, Pillion, which explores a topic that you cover in your fairly recent book, The Deep Psychology of BDSM and Kink, published by Routledge.
Correct.
Yeah, and I've been wanting to speak with you for a while about the book, and I thought, this film coming out just made it extra timely. And I haven't seen many people doing in-depth discussions about the movie. So I thought we could kind of speak about the topics in the book through the lens of this film. And
sounds great.
Maybe even the source material of the original book that you've read and I haven't read. But just maybe first impressions. What did you think of the film?
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised. It's always a bit of a dicey situation when you're going to see a film that involves identity. I can remember early on in my own process coming out as a gay man, that every time that a major motion picture was coming out that featured a gay protagonist, you always wondered, are they going to get it right this time? Or is this going to be some kind of a stereotype or some kind of a character that lacks dimensionality? And so here, making a film about the gay leather community, particularly, it gets quite specific that culturally it's British gay biker leather community, which I think is it has all of its unique inflections. Are they going to get it right? Is this going to be something that pokes fun at what is strange and foreign to a lot of people about BDSM and kink or about gay culture? Or is it going to be handled in a way where there's some kind of a moral that's being imposed on it? Here's a lesson to be taught. But instead, what I found was a film that was made with a tremendous amount of respect and sensitivity and care, and I thought really genuine affection for the characters themselves. So that, as the director Harry Lighton has said in some of his interviews, what he wanted to do was that for people that are not familiar with BDSM and kink, they would actually discover characters who are very relatable, and that they could find elements of these situations, as foreign as they might be in some ways, also not so strange and not so foreign in others. And I thought the film was quite strong in that regard. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought it was wonderful too. Of course, I don't go in as a cisgendered straight male. I don't go in with the same kind of trepidation around how are they going to depict this particular subset of the culture. But I was pleasantly surprised as well. I thought the characters were interesting, multidimensional, in some cases sympathetic. In the case of Alexander Skarsgård character, not so sympathetic. He's kind of a sociopath, but a sociopath with a heart that becomes revealed at a certain point in the film. And of course, Harry Melling, I thought, was just amazing as Colin. Immediately, we fell in love with him.
Yeah, very, very sympathetic portrayal. And I think it would be interesting to talk a little more about the character of Ray. I'm sure we will as we get into it, the character played by Alexander Skarsgård. What did you find as sociopathic?
Well, for watching the film anyway, his role as the Dom, and that kind of distance that came out in the play between him and Colin, he never really seemed to turn it off
Hmm.
until a certain point in the film when the character of Colin starts to assert himself and ask for a break from the role play. And that was a really wonderful turn in the film, and to see how Skarsgård's character really kind of opened up to it, and he, kind of going through a bit of a struggle to just relax and be like a normal couple for at least a day, was really interesting. But I just got the sense that he was very kind of mysterious and detached in general. Even the kind of the Spartan quality of his living space.
Hmm.
It didn't seem like it was just a role play. That it was really part of his I don't know, his persona, his being. There wasn't a lot of differentiation, I think.
I think that's a good point. Definitely, this is an example of somebody who finds an identity that goes very deep through leather and the bike culture. And especially, the other thing I think we should probably do is break down the letters that make up the rubric of BDSM. Because to me, Ray and Colin are very much an example of domination and submission. The focus of the relationship is on power, control, authority exchange, and service. It's a relationship that has a lot to do with service and handing control over to another person. It does not, in my opinion, I mean, the way that I viewed it, it doesn't get that heavily into sadomasochism, where that might have been for another relationship something much more central to what they wanted to explore or experience together, but not so much for these two men. And so I think that also speaks to the complexity of BDSM is not one coherent set of practices that is universally embraced by everybody that likes BDSM or identifies with it as a culture or a lifestyle. And then we've also got this other point, which is what I was starting to reference in your comment. There's a spectrum of that ranges from people that enjoy this as a recreational activity to do once in a while, or to maybe spice up a night in the bedroom, to other people where it's very much a core part of their identity, and it's how they move through the world on a daily basis, 24/7. And Ray is definitely on that end of the spectrum as a character where this is very much authentic and true to who he is. It's an interesting question that I really like to keep open with a curiosity about who is this man, because there's a tremendous amount of secrecy and privacy. And that's consistent in the original novella. We should give a plug. The original book is called Box Hill, and the author is Adam Mars Jones. It's a good book. It's a good little novel and a fun read. And the character of Ray is very consistent between novel and film. That Collins knows very little about who Ray is. The ending of the book, I will tell you, is extremely different from the movie. Um, I shouldn't say extremely, but the plot goes in a very different direction, and so there is more speculation at the end of the book as to, what kind of family did Ray come from, and how much was his life as a biker, a response, a countercultural, rebellious response to something that he might have been raised in. Um, but I think that that is an important element where when we talk about sociopathy, I think about somebody who is violating the rights of other people without any sense of remorse. And it ties in with the diagnostic criteria that we have for an antisocial personality. And it is one of the criticisms of the film, and I think it's one of the things that's complicated and that is really worth talking about, is some people in the leather community have objected to the lack of negotiation and consent. You know, I don't think that maybe you want to put some kind of a warning at the beginning of the podcast that this discussion does include spoilers. Like
Well,
we've
there it
already
is.
done it.
Yeah. Here there be spoilers. Yes.
We've already done it. But, um, from the beginning, there is no engagement as a kind of egalitarian relationship where, hey, I think that you would really enjoy something that I can teach you or show you about sexuality or, what bikers like to do. Or, I'm a dom and you look like you have some submissive tendencies. Do you want to explore that with me? There's no conversation like that. Nothing close
Mm.
to it. It's very much Ray is a man of few words. If he doesn't have to use words, if he can convey what he wants by snapping his finger and giving a nod, that's how he's going to do it. And I think that that's something essential about who Ray is. And what that creates is a situation that puts pressure on Colin to move into his tendencies towards being of service and being submissive and being helpful and wanting to please, you know. And so that's a conversation. I think it would be interesting to hear some of your reaction here.
Mm.
Did you feel like Colin's rights were being violated? Did you feel like, when they first have sex, was that rape?
Mm.
Or do you think it was consensual without anybody verbally giving consent or saying what they were going to do?
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that I really appreciated about the film is that it wasn't so didactic in terms of consent, but I felt a lot was communicated through the gestures, postures, kind of the nonverbal communication between the two. Like right from their first meeting in the bar, I felt like Ray Skarsgård's character was kind of testing out this cute boy that he saw at the bar and see like, is he a potential candidate for my Pillion? And we might just say I didn't know what the word Pillion meant before watching the film, and so I looked it up afterwards. Like, what does that word have to do with this film? And it has, I think the original meaning is like a saddlebag or something like that you would have on the back of a bike,
Mm.
right?
It's fascinating. I'm so glad you're bringing up the title because I had the same curiosity. I'd never heard the word before the film, and being into depth psychology, I think for both of us, it's like we're going to go back and look up not only the word but what's the etymology and where did it come from and what's
Yeah.
the image buried. The image buried in the word is like so perfect. Where I think the original novel is not called Pillion, it's called Box Hill, which is the name of the location where he and Ray meet for the first time. I mean, there are other symbolic meanings to Box Hill, but that's for another conversation. But Pillion, right? My understanding was that it was, well, it's related to the word for pelt. And so it was
Right.
like the leather canvas that was put over the back of the horse for the second rider.
Mm.
And then over time, it referred not so much to the canvas, but to the second rider,
Mm.
and then transferred over to motorcycle. But it comes, I think, from the Middle Ages. It
Mm.
goes way back, so to horse riding, and then for bikes, it became the second rider on the back of the bike, which is so not only the perfect description of who Colin is as Ray's second, but also by tying it etymologically to pelt, we have this relationship with leather as the pelt of the cow that's, becomes the second skin for leather men who wear the clothes, the gear.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. And then so they have the first meeting and there's I think a bit of a feeling out process. And then they go to the alleyway to consummate or initiate the relationship. And I thought, I don't know, that the way that was handled, I felt that there was this, feeling out of the roles. It
Mm.
was happening in a subtle way, which I appreciated. It felt to me like a kind of a very mature way to depict this.
Mhm.
So I didn't have the same response. I felt that that Ray or sorry, that Colin, the Pillion in the couple, was always showing agency and awareness of what was going on, and very happy. Like, I love that one line. We spoke about this before we started recording, but his coworker asked him how he got such a handsome guy, because he's kind of a normal looking guy, I guess. And Skarsgård's character is like the epitome of this Adonis. And he says, "Well, someone said once I have a talent for devotion."
Yeah.
And you can really see that devotion from the get-go
Yeah.
between the two. And so it's interesting too, because it does show some of that spectrum that you're speaking of, where he's not just submissive in terms of being like a masochist, wanting to be punished, but his submissiveness comes from a
Yeah.
devotion too, which has a different feeling or intention or meaning around it, I think.
I completely agree. And there's this other really beautiful moment, and to me it's beautiful, in the alley, before anything happens between them, where Ray looks at him, and this does occur in the book too. So that's true to the original story. And there's just this twinkle of amusement in his eye looking at Colin, and he says, "What am I going to do with you?"
Yeah.
And that's about as close as they come to negotiation and consent, because Colin's response, you can just see he's bedazzled.
Yeah. Anything you want.
Anything you want, actually.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, there is this sense of a meeting or a convergence, or like I think everything unfolds from those two statements
Mm.
in a way, in terms of what happens sexually, and it doesn't have to be talked about. And um, I think that is one of the things I would really like to emphasize about my viewing of the film. This is a particular kind of sexuality that is being represented or portrayed for us. And within that type of alternative sexuality, it's very clearly a sexuality that works for these two men. And so it's not, as we said before, it's not trying to either moralize or to tell us, no, if you're into leather, this is the way you have sex. It's very true to these two characters. I'm trying to think off the top of my head of some of the other films, of straight couples where the sexuality was a really important part of the film, but it's clear like this is not a depiction of how heterosexual couples have sex. This is a depiction of how these two people coming together make love.
Hmm.
And I think that the one of the strengths of Pillion is that it's being true to these two characters and how they work it out, and that there's a certain amount of awkwardness and there's a certain amount of exploring and just figuring it out in the moment, right?
Hmm.
And there's a quote that the director Harry Lighton gave in a magazine interview that I really loved. Where if you have just a quick second here, I think that I can probably find it.
Hmm.
Um, where he's saying, it wasn't that he really wanted to make some kind of teach some kind of a lesson with this film. Let me see if I can get down here to this quote. It's really good. It's good enough I want to actually read it to you. He says, um, part of what was driving me when I was writing was wanting to explore the idea that through putting yourself into situations where you don't have much control and where there's risk, bad stuff can happen, heartbreak can happen, abuse can happen, but you can also learn about yourself and learn how to better negotiate your wants in your next relationship. I don't want to give people a lesson of the film, but that was certainly something that when I'd get lost in the writing, I would always go back to. I just thought
Mm.
that's such a great quote, because I think that's very much what the film succeeds at, quite well.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah, it's like they meet each other, and it's like you find the other that draws this aspect of your personality or character out and gives you a forum or a stage on which to play this part of yourself. And this is something that you talk about in your book, like BDSM and kink as a kind of a vehicle for individuation, for exploring these sides of yourself that are counter to the culture or alternative or transgressive. It's kind of like I don't know, would you say it's like a shadow play?
Hmm. Well, certainly shadow integration has a lot to do with individuation. I mean, I really, from in the Jungian world, I think we would pretty much all agree we can't individuate without without doing shadow work. So, yes, there is the element of play that is fundamental to BDSM, and I would add to psychological health. And there is work with the shadow for sure. Um, to me, Pillion is a really beautiful film about individuation of a particular person. And so I was saying before we started recording, there's a moment where Ray cuts Colin's hair, and he has a kind of, I don't know how you would describe it, but it's a kind of funny, moppy, awkward haircut
Very
at the beginning
boyish.
of boyish, yeah, a boyish haircut, and it all gets cut off, so it is like the kind of punk buzz cut, really really down to the stubble. And he emerges from that in the next scene, which I think is actually shot in slow motion, if I remember, so that you
Mm.
really feel like it's this moment of arrival, and he has this beaming smile on his face, as well as a chain and padlock around his neck, signifying that he's owned. And all of the members of the biker club are gathering around him, wrapping their arms around him and rubbing his head. And you have this sense of initiation and belonging. But it's not only the initiation and belonging, but you see on his face that this is somebody who's really emerging,
Hmm.
who's discovering it's a revelation to him that, oh, this is who I truly am, or this is what feels natural to me as a way of being in the world. This feels much more comfortable and much more authentic. And those to me are the hallmarks of an individuation process. And I think it's just a really beautiful depiction of that. And that does tie in with what I was trying to emphasize in the book, that BDSM becomes an individuation path for a lot of people because with transgression, we are bringing in this element of shadow, if not the personal shadow, certainly the collective shadow. And it is one of the points that Jung made a number of times in his career, that it appears in the collected works, that a true individuation must involve transgression. It's when we bump up against these aspects of our own nature where we simply cannot conform to the conventions of the society around us. We've developed this version of ourselves, this persona, earlier in our lives that is going to be acceptable to other people and it's going to earn their approval. And when we're really going through individuation, we bump up against the shadow We bump up against those aspects that are not socially acceptable, are not going to be approved of or condoned. And we have to come to terms with that. And in one way or another, we say, this is who I am. And I know that you may not like it, but it's not something that's going to change. And I think you can see how that relates to people that find an identity that feels profoundly true as an expression of who they really are through BDSM and through transgressive sex.
In your study of this topic, I'm just curious if you found that, like, say for Colin's character acting as Pillion, is there any, how do I ask this question? I'm wondering if that can be a stage of individuation. Like, are there instances where people kind of grow out of that and maybe shift roles?
Mhm.
Yeah, what did you find?
You find a bit of everything,
Hmm.
but I think it's more common than has been reported in the literature that people will go through a period of time where this is a very important part of who they are, and then it gets integrated, and they may find other areas of interest or other aspects of their personality that become equally important, or it becomes so integrated that it's no longer transgressive or particularly extraordinary.
Mm.
You know, some of the podcasts that are devoted to kink and BDSM will regularly return to the topic of, how do you keep your love life interesting and exciting if, what was initially so shocking and transgressive now becomes commonplace?
Hmm.
And, what are you going to do after that? And for people that are, what do you want to say, long-term members of the community, there are all kinds of ideas of how to keep things spicy. And it's very much like for any of us in a relationship, we need an element of surprise. We need something unpredictable. We need presents or gifts or something else that brings in that vitality and that libido to keep things interesting. And so I think that it is true. On the one hand, some people may outgrow it and move on to other things. I think that certainly there are some people for the duration of their lives. I was just visiting with a friend of mine who's been part of the leather community for decades, and who said to a mutual friend, he said, "No, this is my life. You realize, and he
Hmm.
said it with this sense of gravitas, right? Um, then there's this other aspect that it can be your life, and you can find that you are what we call a switch, right? So it's not that you are only a pillion. It's not that you're only submissive, but with some people, you might find yourself connecting with your dominant aspects of your personality. And that's something that comes to the forefront and is really enjoyable to explore with somebody else,
Mm.
and so there isn't, in my opinion, there isn't a bias or there isn't a need to identify and say, well, either you're one or the other, or maybe the person who's the most integrated is the switch who's in between, and that's what we should all, those shoulds around like, oh, well, there's a best way to do this, or the most psychologically healthy way to do this. I think that's part of what I was trying to get at earlier about the movie not trying to offer anything up as a paradigm, but
Mm.
to say, like, this is a story about two guys, and this is how they negotiated their relationship together, and
Yeah.
and how they experience love, Yeah.
Yeah. And at this moment in time, like, who knows what happens after the film ends? The film ends with Colin finding a new guy that he can be devoted to, who just kind of
Yeah.
like fits the bill for him.
Yeah.
But down the road, who knows? And I like that, like not seeing it as a kind of developmental stage that you go through and you outgrow, and then once it's integrated, then I can practice being a dom, and then I'll integrate that part of myself, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or also, I think there is a misconception about BDSM in the straight community that if there is I think particularly the SM part of it, that in order to keep the charge, to keep the spark going, you have to keep kind of escalating the stakes or the extremity of the practice. What have you found in speaking with practitioners? Is that a fallacy, or is there, I mean, maybe in
No.
some cases there's truth to it, but
Well, it's complicated. That's why I'm pausing
yeah.
and trying to collect my thoughts on how I want to answer it because I think it opens up several different points that are really worth talking about. Um, it's not a fallacy. I think that, what I was saying before, people are looking for ways to keep it exciting, and one of the ways that they seek out that excitement is to increase the intensity. And then increasing the intensity also brings up questions about endurance and how much can the body stand and what are we trying to do to our bodies in order to keep it feeling exciting and pleasurable. And there's quite a bit about BDSM that is inherently fascinated with limits, right? The whole, one of the, I would say, major categories of BDSM is called edge play, right? And edge play can involve any number of different specific activities, but the point is how far can you go? How much can you take? How close to the edge can you get before it's too much, before it's too far, before the knife is actually cut into the skin and the blood's flowing and you weren't intending to draw blood.
Mm.
It can be these extreme situations, but the excitement is in the extreme,
In
right?
playing
And
playing with the edges.
it's
Yeah.
playing on the edge and playing with the edge, right?
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot that's really interesting psychologically about that because really from childhood, you can look at toddlers and they're already discovering the edge and they're experimenting with it. I'm having a memory right now of being at a restaurant with my nephew when he was probably about 4 years old, and I think he discovered lemon for the very first time. Like somebody had ordered an iced tea, and like he took it and bit into it, and just the look of sort of excruciating revulsion on his face. But then what did the kid do? He took another bite.
Yeah.
That he can't stay away from it because it's like so extreme that he's fascinated with this of like, let me learn this horrible thing, right? And then
Yeah.
after a while, it doesn't even become so horrible anymore. It's in human nature. It's not just BDSM, but BDSM foregrounds it. And um, what do I want to say? Kind of honors that fascination. And
Makes it explicit and
yeah, yeah. Thanks. That's what I'm
kind
trying
of
to
brings
say.
it into consciousness.
Yeah, and then what happens? What happens to us? Because I think that's so much. Um, there was one author of a really great BDSM book. His name is Raven Caldera, and the book is called Dark Moon Rising, where the subheading is the ordeal path or exploring the ordeal path. And that's very much the idea of edge play. But then you can look at, this is getting more into, I think, the archetypal aspect of BDSM, that you have these rituals and ceremonies in cultures all around the world and all throughout history that have involved a kind of very strategic use of pain and suffering as a form of initiation and as a form of psychological transformation, right? And is it that different what people are doing with kink and BDSM, except they're not always consciously entering into it with the objective of psychological transformation or wanting to create a container and a ritual space for something sacred to happen. Um,
Mm,
but nevertheless, I would say from a Jungian perspective, something numinous is very much happening, often to their surprise and delight, and that's what draws people back over and over again.
mm, hmm. Yeah, like the unconscious motivation could be a kind of initiation and personal transformation.
Yeah.
How important do you think it is for people to be conscious of that? Like,
Mm.
it's like psyche's going to individuate, whether you're aware of it or not, and maybe it comes as a surprise revelation, like you said. I mean, even when you interviewed people around this, practitioners, how many people were thinking this way?
Mm. Few. I would say it's definitely a minority, and that's one of the things that I was trying to be careful about with the book, but I don't know that I was as successful as I wish I had been. Which is to say, look, there are many different ways to enjoy sex, and not every one of them has to be an individuation path. Or, if you're not foregrounding your psychological growth through the way that you're being sexual, you're missing something, and you need to go back and do it differently. I did not want to set up any kind of a juxtaposition between right and wrong or an ideal way to do it, much like I'm kind of praising the film for having avoided that trap. Um, that being said, what I think is really fascinating about BDSM, among other things, is that it creates this potential for growth and transformation that we normally don't think of when it comes to sex. I think I have a quote from James Hillman in the book where he's saying that actually this was something Jung indicated early on in his writing, that sexuality is a way that the soul speaks, that our libido and our sexuality are tied up very much with the unconscious and with the reality of the psyche beyond the conscious personality. And so, as far as having a connection to soul and being what I would argue is probably the most psychological expression of sexuality. What we find in BDSM is something that is really connected with the unconscious and with the archetypal depths.
Hmm.
So that that potential is there, and it's to me like right on the threshold of being made explicit. And some people will immediately get that, and other people will say, I don't quite follow you. That's not what I experience. I like the sensation. I like the intensity. I like what gets created between me and my partner or the creativity of it. But I'm not doing it to transform or become more mature or more individuated. And um, that's not what I'm after. And that's absolutely like that's just true. That's just the way it is.
Yeah, and one of the things I appreciate about Hillman is that he avoids those kind of developmental frameworks, and he would say that the one of the aspects of soul is that it turns events into experiences, which means that there's some like self-reflection to turn it into an experience, and maybe finding a deeper meaning or purpose to the, let's say, behavior. And so I think one of the things that BDSM practitioners who are kind of, I would say, responsible, they're having conversations about what's going on. And so there seems to be a lot of self-reflection happening, and I don't know, continually kind of checking in with oneself and your partner to see, like, is this where we want to go? Do we want to try something different? That kind of negotiation seems to me just kind of inherently soul making, even if that isn't made explicit or a specific intent by the
Yeah.
practitioners, right? So it's kind of, it's happening anyway, maybe in a lot of cases, yeah?
Oh, I agree with you. That's a really great point, Brian. Yeah. Um, I think that you've got that right. And it does bring us back to the film as an interesting question because Ray is not somebody who's a big communicator. And there isn't a
Well,
whole lot of,
verbal.
yeah, at least not verbal, right?
Hmm.
Exactly. And there's not much going on that would be regarded today as what we call aftercare. And for serious practitioners, aftercare is always recommended, if not required, after a scene, which means there's a transition. You've come into a space where something very intense has happened. Particularly if it's involved some kind of edge play, limits have been tested, been pushed to the edge of your endurance. Part of the excitement of BDSM is when you get to that edge where there's a loss of control, and some people feel like I'm not going to get the experience that I really wanted until I lose control. So you have some transition time afterwards. You're not just going to put your clothes on and get in your car and drive home and, I don't know, microwave something for dinner. You're gonna sit, now some people really want to sit in close proximity to each other, arm in arm, or if they're in the submissive role and there's been some masochism or some sadism, it's important as part of the transition to move out of that so that they'll be held by the dominant partner and will feel cared for, and that there will be some praise or some tenderness, like, oh, you really did that so well, or I was so proud of the way you handled that. I wasn't sure if I was pushing you too hard there, if it was too fast, and what was it like for you? Tell me your side of the experience, right? So we're going to try and bring some language to things that frankly probably can't be fully put into words, but it's an integration. I
Hmm.
think kind of to your point that there's an integration that's taking place, and it minimizes the risk for something that might be, you know, hard to metabolize psychologically on your own later on, particularly if there have been marks or bruises or, anything that remains afterwards, and you look at it the next day and think, oh my God, what did I do? And then the shame can come up around that. Aftercare is a wonderful way to to minimize the risk of that kind of shame spiraling coming out of the experience. We don't see that represented in this film. That's not who these guys are. And you'll hear some people who will say, my idea of aftercare is a cigarette and leave me alone. you know.
Hmm.
So it's, again, we can't generalize, but
Hmm.
it is to me a kind of extraordinary practice that is psychologically very sound.
Hmm. Hmm. This brings up another question, and maybe it's a misconception, but I think there is an idea that from people outside the culture that people practicing BDSM are somehow working out some past trauma through that practice.
Mhm.
Yeah, what are your thoughts or findings on this?
There's been some pretty good research. I shouldn't say pretty good. That sounds like I'm minimizing it. There's been some very solid research and that has tried to investigate this question. And what they found was that there is a subset of BDSM practitioners who have a history of trauma. And within that subset, there's some people who are very consciously going through what we would call a corrective emotional experience, that whereas in the first instance, there was no negotiation, there was no consent, and there was also no control. They are re-entering a space in which there's consciously and voluntarily surrendering control after negotiation and consent, and they are empowered because they're choosing it this time, and they know ultimately they have the power to stop it by using a safe word. And so it becomes something that they experience as healing. But this is not something that's true for everybody that enjoys BDSM. So if the question is, um, do people enjoy BDSM because they were traumatized as young people? The answer is no. That is not universally true, and it's because it's only a subset. And then we have people outside the world of BDSM who were traumatized.
Hmm.
uh,
Right. Not everyone who is traumatized practices BDSM. Not everyone who practices
Thank you.
BDSM was traumatized. Yeah.
You got it.
Right.
Maybe I'm like becoming too fussy about how I'm trying to describe it, but you got it. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I thought that was something I appreciated about the film too. I think so many contemporary films are kind of a product of what's been called, what I think of as trauma culture, where
Yeah, right.
or therapy culture more generally, where a lot of films, I think, for me, are ruined because it all becomes about the character's healing of trauma, and there's a lot of therapy speak, and it kind of loses the excitement and charge of watching a drama play out, and then maybe getting curious about the subtext and background of the characters and all that. Like it's made so kind of explicit now.
Mm.
And that's one of the things that I appreciated about the film, that it wasn't like made clear that, that Colin, the sub character, is like working out some kind of trauma. Like his family just seems so kind of normal and like bog standard English family. And he's quite open with them. They're involved with his life. There's no shame when he shaves his head and starts wearing his, the padlock around his neck. He
Yeah.
even brings Ray over for dinner, kind of
Yeah.
reluctantly. But so I like how they didn't play into that whole, I don't know, the trend that I'm seeing in a lot of cinema these days.
Right. Yeah, I think that there's some people and that speculate, and I think you and I did a little bit of it at the beginning of the interview. Like what makes Ray tick, and is there some trauma in his history that he's unable to either be more expressive or to be more communicative, or to be more relational, But I stay very open to the possibility. Look, that this is who this guy is. He knows who he is. Take him or leave him. You're going
Hmm.
to engage with him on his terms, and that's part of what it means to be a dominant. And he's not apologetic. He's not going to apologize for it. I mean, there's a line which I think is really very psychologically astute when they're having dinner with the parents, and the mother leans forward and says, "I don't think I like the way you talk to my son."
Hmm.
Right? And his response is, I realize that I make you uncomfortable, right? But I think basing what's good for your son on what makes you comfortable is rather ignorant and not a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, that was such a great confrontation. He didn't just kind of, yeah, he didn't stop being himself in that situation where there was a lot of kind of pressure around, let's just have a nice dinner with my parents and show them that you're a normal guy. Like he's himself,
Yeah.
for better or for worse, through and through, and consistently. Like there's congruence there, apparently.
Yeah. And see, I think that there's an impulse to problematize that kind of look, if he has an aspect that's not relational in a conventional sense, or right in some kind of a normative sense, are we problematizing that? Well, there's something wrong with him. I remember when I saw the movie, boy, big spoiler, stop listening if you don't want to know this. Sorry. But you get to the end of the movie, and after the, sort of ideal romantic day off, he disappears.
Mm.
Somebody in the audience says, "Oh, he couldn't handle the intimacy."
That was
And
my reaction too. It's like, oh, he's disappeared again. He's moved on.
yeah, like, oh, like they got too close. And so let's talk about that, because I think that there's this moment which is perhaps the most enigmatic moment of the film, and to me, then the most enjoyable because I may spend the rest of my life puzzling over what all was going on there. There is a moment where they finally kiss, and that is one of the sort of big areas of conflict. You know that it's something that Colin would like, and it's something that Ray simply does not do. But here they finally have the romantic kiss, and it's a kiss that Ray initiates. And then the camera gives us a close-up of Ray's face, and we see this expression of deep pain. At least that's how I interpret the expression on his face. And what was happening for him in that moment, is a really interesting question because Ray as a character remains opaque in many, many ways. He becomes this profoundly important person in Colin's life, and yet how well do we ever really know him? You know, it just turns all of
Hmm.
our conventional ideas about intimacy on their head,
Hmm.
you
Yeah.
know? And yet, I think most people seeing the film will tell you this is a very intimate relationship between these two men. But
Hmm.
it's not intimate in the sense of revelation that I'll tell you everything about me and what's going on inside me and what I'm thinking and feeling. But it's something else that's sharing something of the essence of who these two people are, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how you experience that. I'm curious to hear.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, as we continue this conversation, I want to take back what I said about Ray being like a sociopath. I mean, I think that's a possibility, and that he did respond to intimacy, letting down his guard on that day where they were just more a playful couple. That he did respond to that in a kind of a defensive way and just took off like it was too much for him. But I don't know. I mean, that's, yeah, maybe just me kind of reading into it based on my own biases and prejudices about what real intimacy,
Mm.
or love looks like. I mean, Colin was kind of heartbroken and, abandoned in a way, just as they were kind of maybe opening up the relationship and adding more complexity and things like that, and maybe more of a give and take, his needs getting met, and to have this guy just split. Yeah, it was certainly painful.
Hmm.
But again,
It's,
like there's always the question, like how's he going to negotiate that next relationship where the film ends? Like, will that become more explicit from the get-go that, I need at least a day off or something like that?
yeah.
So we don't know. And I like that kind of openness too.
And that's why I read the quote from Harry Lighton, where he says heartbreak, is going to happen, or
Hmm.
bad things are going to happen in a relationship. I mean, this is part of what intimacy. We don't experience intimacy without vulnerability, and I mean the root of the word vulnerability is woundedness.
Hmm.
The
Right.
vulnera that we're going to be wounded and then we're going to be changed. It's one of the ways that a relationship changes us, and sometimes for the better. That, it's not only that we come out scarred and guarded, and no, I'm never going to let that happen to me again, but sometimes we come out wiser and
Hmm.
be like, yeah, no, this is part of what people do to each other, or this is part of how love works, and then we go through heartbreak, and it's part of living the full game of life. I mean, that's the other meaning of individuation, is that you experience it all.
Yeah. And Hillman was so great about this, is valuing all of human experience, really. And I'm reminded of his essay on betrayal and like the necessity of betrayal. And so who knows what Colin will make of that betrayal after the fact.
Right.
He may come out wiser and more assertive, in the beginning of negotiating the new relationship. We don't really know. But even if it has us thinking about that, then the film is working in a kind of soul-making way for us.
Beautiful. Beautifully put, Brian. So So true. And we also don't know what happens to Ray after the film,
Hmm.
right? Was this a relationship that changed him in some way? He may present himself as some kind of impenetrable rock, that he is who he is. He's never going to change. But already in the film, he's changed. I did have
Well, that's right, because he's kind of extending his boundaries too, even with like
yes.
agreeing to the day of playfulness, and you see, well, he's enjoying this, he's getting into it, and then the kiss too.
Mhm.
So that's interesting too, that even the kind of the dominant part of the couple is extending their boundaries, but not in terms of like what they can tolerate in terms of pain or submissiveness, but in terms of intimacy, openness, tenderness.
Yeah.
That's really interesting because you get to see both sides of it. Yeah.
Yeah. There's this other extraordinary thing that happens. I don't know why I get choked up. I mean, I do know why I get choked up, but
It touches your heart.
it's this extraordinary thing as part of the day off where Ray says, "Why don't you teach me how to sing?" And they've established early
Oh
in the
yeah,
film that Colin knows how to sing, right? And it's clear that Colin is a much better singer than Ray. And you can see the way that Ray is really really playing with it, but playing, in a way that puts him at a disadvantage where they come up to the two women and
that's
say,
right.
okay, which one of us is the better singer here? Because he seems to think that he's better than I am, and clearly Colin's the better singer. So it's a kind of a role reversal, like he's
Yeah,
saying, look, here's something that you can do better than me. I don't have to be the best at everything, right?
all the time. Yeah,
All the time, right?
yeah. Well, that was so much of that day off was you see him actually in such a giving mode,
Yes.
and so giving Colin that moment of lifting him up, even with the women, how he engages the women to be, well, clearly he's the better singer. So it's like in service to Colin's, like, I don't know, do I want to say self-esteem, but it's a
Yeah.
gift to him in a
Yeah.
way, you know?
Whatever we want to call that, of a kind of personal pride or appreciation for your strengths.
Appreciation, that's the word I was looking for. Yeah. The
Yeah.
gift of appreciation, of raising in value, of recognizing someone's
Yeah.
value and talent. Yeah.
And I think it's another example of where this is not a story about degradation.
Hmm.
That what Ray is doing there is saying, I want you to see that, I recognize the ways in which I appreciate the ways in which you are a superior person,
Hmm.
you know. And I wonder if that is also part of the pain. I mean, this is as much my subjective interpretation as it is a kind of psychological analysis. But I just wonder, I mean, the expression on his face is enigmatic, and we don't know the source of the feeling. But I wonder if part of the pain is that this day off is a kind of role play, that he's experimenting with being a different kind of partner. And I will add to that, I think it is really important that there was an extreme breach that occurred in the dynamic between the two of them preceding this scene, so that as the audience, you're really expecting that what's going to happen is that Ray is going to punish Colin, and you're expecting that Ray is going to punish him quite severely for being so disobedient, right? For
Right. He
breaking kind of,
steals his bike and takes it on a
yeah. I mean, he
actual, like a
does.
literal joyride.
He goes on a joyride, and it's kind of like really about the worst thing that he possibly could do, because we see how much that bike means to Ray. Right. So we're
Yeah.
expecting, oh, this is going to be like the worst punishment ever. And instead,
Yeah.
he says, oh, I thought we could have a day off, which is what Colin had asked for,
It's almost
earlier.
like, Colin acting out in that way and so defiantly just showed Ray, like, okay, maybe this is like needed actually, that we take a day
Mhm.
off and that I give this a try. So even in that in those roles that they play, there is showing like a deep care and consideration for Colin, the sub, right? Not just to be degraded, not to have his needs ignored and things like that, but he actually is aware of it. And it took that moment of defiance from Colin to show him, like, look, I'm serious about this. I need a break, or else, Yeah.
And I think that's another example of where individuation is very relevant to what happens in the film. That it's another transgression.
Yeah.
Colin's not transgressing conventional norms or what his mother would want for him, but he's transgressing the norms of this relationship. He's rebelling against his master, right? And so I have thought that perhaps where we're expecting a punishment, I like your interpretation that maybe this is how we recalibrate. Um, I was thinking that this is something Ray is just not capable of doing. I can do it once, but this will be the end of the relationship. And that the pain on his face is like we've come as far as we can to the kind of the day off, the vanilla version of what it would be like to be a couple where we're equals or where there's give and take. And that's not something that I can do, but it's something that I've given to you as a going away gift.
To watch or listen to the full episode, become a free or paid member by visiting patreon.com/Howl in the Wilderness, or by downloading the Patreon app to your mobile device. Paid memberships start at just $5 a month and offer a number of benefits, including early access to all episodes, the full podcast archives, and the satisfaction of knowing that you're supporting an independent creator directly. Thanks.